Welcome to r/malicious compliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. Thank you, friends, for subscribing to the channel, and for so many likes. The first story. Boss said we need a ticket for every call that's going off, but it took a very long time. The second story. I refused to work for a boss who was yelling at me, so I didn't take over. The third story. My chief kicked me out of class because he thought I wasn't shaved. The first story is, tickets please. It's been more than 20 years. I think I can get away with talking about this. In the late 1990s, I worked for the internal help desk of a Fortune 500 company. Employees would call in and enter their employee number into the phone system, and when we answered the call, we had a system that automatically opened a problem ticket with their employee number, which would pre-fill the rest of the ticket. Until it didn't. It started slowly at first. Maybe one call out of 10 was coming up with the wrong employee's information. And this was annoying because first we'd have to close the ticket that was opened in error. Then we'd have to open a new ticket. So my boss went to the team that was responsible for fixing it, and they said, sure, just have your agents open a ticket for our team every time there's a problem. And almost nobody did this, because filling out a ticket takes time, and there was a customer on the phone already waiting for us to close out one ticket. Within a few days, it was every call that was affected, and my boss goes back to the tools team who were sitting there with their feet metaphorically propped on the desk saying, well, we need a ticket for every call that's going off, or we can't do anything about it. My boss explodes. As it stands, the average call time for the desk is up by more than a minute, which is way worse than it sounds, because we're talking about several thousand calls a day. It's just not reasonable or possible for them to expect, and that's where the tools team made their mistake. They pointed out that there was one agent whose call times were completely unaffected, and who was in fact generating a ticket for every single call. That agent was me. That's when my boss shows up in my office and asks, okay, how the hell are you doing it? I shrugged. Macros? Basically, the system we were using for tickets was on a mainframe, and we accessed it through an advanced kind of terminal program that had macro functionality. I'd created macros for our most common types of tickets, and when the problem first started, I created a macro that would close the ticket out and open a new one. When we were told to create a ticket for the tools team, I modified that macro to copy the ticket number before it closed out the ticket, then created a new ticket for the tools team, and referenced the old ticket number, send it, and open a new ticket. I was actually kind of astonished to learn that nobody else was doing this, because it was childishly simple. And because literally every single affected employee was a tech, all it took to deploy the macro to everyone on the desk was an email with an attached file, and instructions how to install it. A few days later, there's a backlog of over 10,000 tickets, and climbing in the tools team's queue. The head of the tools team has gotten a call from his manager's manager, because it's the largest backlog of tickets in the history of the company, and he goes to my boss and asks him to have a stop. No, you said you needed every single agent to open a ticket for every single affected call, or you couldn't trace the problem. Well, maybe if you had just one agent. We had that. You told us it was insufficient, that you couldn't do anything without that kind of information. Well, now you have it. We've had this problem for over a week now and you haven't been able to fix it. I want to make sure you have all the tickets you need to solve this problem. The problem was fixed within 4 hours. 2 days later, the head of the tools team is here in my office. It turns out that he's got somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 tickets to close. And could I please show him how to use macros? A long time ago, I worked for a company for over 15 years. When I was hired, there were no instructions or manuals for the general terminals I had to use in my work. At first, I didn't understand how to do anything and I needed help. Then I went to consult with a senior employee. He would show me how to do the task by pressing a few keys, and the task was done. He didn't want to waste his time, so he never wrote down what he did. Just tell me. I would go back to the dumb terminal in my neighborhood, and it still wouldn't work. At first, I assumed I had just misremembered his instructions, until I finally caught him saying, I did it. It didn't work. I cried. Oh, maybe the macros aren't set up on this terminal, he finally replied. I still don't know if he had the manual himself. He had been working with these terminals for about a decade and probably didn't need it anymore. I realized that on this terminal, you had to enter a cryptic command to get what was supposed to be called the help menu. It took me a long time to get that, OMG. The second story is, pizza shop owner told me not to show up after 10:15, so I didn't. This story took place a few years ago, but I just remembered it after passing by the shopping center this pizza place used to be in. Background information. At the time, I was working for a window cleaning company and was paid commission. I got paid a fraction of whatever I cleaned. At the beginning of the day, we would be given a list of jobs in an area and drive around until everything was done. Usually the routes were somewhat random, meaning it was rare to get the same route twice in a row. Most routes had a large number of restaurants that had to be done before they opened, so usually we would have to plan out when to get a job based on what time they arrived, so we wouldn't have to backtrack. The route in question will be called Springfield, but this route also had two small pizza places in the next town over, Shelbyville, that were always included because the company did not have any other jobs in that area, and Springfield was the closest town. Both of these jobs didn't usually show up until around 10:15 to 10:30, so I would often have to save them until all my other restaurants were done, before making the 15-minute drive over. There also wasn't enough work on this route to justify sending two people, so whoever had it was by themselves. To the actual story. So one morning I'm driving out to Shelbyville and stop at my first job at around 10:20. This job is cheap, consisting of about one big window and a door. However, the lights were completely off and no one replied when I knocked, so I left to do the other job in the area before returning at around 10:40 to see someone is inside. At that point I get my stuff out and start cleaning the outside, only for the owner to see me and come storming to the door. In a very angry voice, he starts asking me what the hell I thought I was doing. When I explained that I was cleaning the windows, as if it wasn't already apparent, he yells at me that I should have been there earlier, to which I told him what time I was originally there, that the lights were out, and no one answered when I knocked. The owner assured me he was there, but that he just likes to sit in the back office with all the lights out, and next time I should knock harder. Lastly, before I left, after he refused to pay for the outside I'd already done, he yelled that if you can't be here before 10:30, don't even bother coming at all. The malicious compliance. It was around this time that back in Springfield, my boss had picked up another restaurant that was about 10 times more expensive, but had the same issue of people not showing up until around 9:45 to 10 o'clock to allow me to clean the inside. This meant that every time I had this route, I had to pick between a job that cost $10 or a job that cost $100. I picked the more expensive one. Because this new place was so much bigger, even if I did the outside before they got there, it would still take me at least 20 to 30 minutes to finish the inside. Because of this, I wouldn't even start driving out to Shelbyville until almost 10:30. As a result, I took what that owner said to heart and stopped showing up. And because of some weird twist of fate, I ended up getting this route multiple times in a row, so this guy hadn't been cleaned for 6 months straight before someone else had eventually had to do it. It became even funnier for me as during those 6 months, we picked up a dry cleaner right next door to him that I would clean while staying just out of sight of the pizza place. It also somehow slipped past my bosses that I hadn't been doing this one job, as it never came up. When my coworker went to go clean it, the owner apparently thought we had gone out of business or something, as he hadn't seen us in so long. Shortly after, he canceled service altogether, then went out of business maybe another 2 months after that. I think this boss got what he deserved. Just because you're the boss doesn't mean you can be rude to your subordinates. I think if the boss had calmly told the OP to come in early, the OP wouldn't have said no. But if the first thing your boss does is yell, don't expect help. Karma will catch up with you, or malicious submission. My sister got a job at a bar. She was on probation. The boss, using his shaft, started humiliating her from the very beginning, often leaving comments like, if you don't like it, you can look for a new job, and so on. So one day when the boss accused her of misconduct, which she did not do, my sister simply said that she got a better offer at another job. It was a competitive bar, and since it was still her probation, she could just resign with a day's notice. The boss was angry. My sister's colleagues said it took them a long time to find a replacement because the working conditions sucked. I hope it taught him to treat his employees like decent people and not slaves. The last story is, kick me out of class because rules state I must be clean-shaven. Guess I'll have to comply. Many years ago, I attended and graduated from a culinary institute. The program was for professional cooking. It was a lot more than just learning to cook, though. It also had classes about menu planning and creation, restaurant management, finance and cost analysis, etc. It was more of a program to teach you how to be a chef and run a restaurant. Being that it was a professional program, there were some very strict policies. When attending classes outside of the kitchen, there was a uniform to wear. When classes were in the kitchen, there was another. Hat, jacket, neckerchief, apron, pants, non-slip shoes. While in the kitchen, no jewelry or piercings could be worn. No nail polish either. Men had to be clean-shaven. No beards or mustaches. Even stubble was not allowed and hair kept tidy. I saw a guy use a kitchen knife to cut off his dreads when they stuck out of his chef's hat. One policy was time and attendance. Classes started at a specific time, not a minute later. When the start time came, the chef would close and lock the door. There was no leniency. There was also no valid reason to be late. Public transit late due to a snowstorm? Not valid. What really made this worse was that to graduate, you needed to have a certain number of hours in the kitchen. If you were a minute late and were not allowed into class that day, you would then be missing those 5 hours and would have no way to make them up. The only reason that was accepted to miss a class was with a doctor's note. With a doctor's note, you then had to show up an hour early each day for 5 days to prep the kitchen to make up the missing hours. I lived a bit more than an hour away from the school by public transit. Some classes started at 6 a.m., others at 9 a.m., others at 1 p.m. Getting to the early classes on time was always a pain, especially making sure I was early in case of any delays. For the 6 a.m. and 9 a.m. classes, I would usually shave the evening before. No big deal. I had no issues doing this for at least a year. One day, partway through a class that had started at 6 a.m., the chef stopped me and asked if I had shaved that morning. I told him honestly that since I had to be up at 4 a.m. to make it on time, I shaved the night before. This was unacceptable to him, and I was sent out of class. He did tell me I could return once I had shaved. He probably expected me to go home and not return for the day. There was no way I was going to have to fight to make up hours over something so trivial. I left class and found the closest convenience store. I purchased the cheapest plastic disposable razor I could find and a travel-size shaving cream. I went back to school and proceeded to shave my face in the men's bathroom. By the time I was done, my face was bleeding all over. My skin irritated so bad. I stuck little pieces of toilet paper on all the spots I was bleeding. I put my uniform on, walked through the school, right back to the kitchen, and continued on what I was doing. The look on the chef's face was great. How professional do I look now? He told me I looked ridiculous and to get back to the assignment. The policy was changed and that he let up a bit. I had another moment in this school. One day the chef was being replaced by someone else. Didn't realize this yet as the class had not officially started. He was dressed like a student, and not like the chef normally is. Smaller hat. You know how chefs love bigger hats. I accidentally addressed him like I would another student. Still very respectfully. I thought maybe he was from the class before me. Oh man, did I get an earful for not addressing him properly. Such a rigorous school. I wouldn't want to go to one. That chief reminded me of the character from the cartoon Ratatouille, Anton Ego. I think that's exactly what he looks like, haha. But seriously, I don't think it's become a problem. Your stubble won't get in the food, so I don't see any reason to shave it urgently. I've never understood the need for such a culture in a professional kitchen. It's one thing to be strict. It's another to make such crazy demands that the class becomes almost impassable. To peeve off, your boss would have to wear a plastic head cap over your face. I would see how your boss would react. You would most likely get expelled, but that would be a beautiful toxic compliance. Ha ha ha. My friend's beard grows like bushes. He needs to shave twice a day. I don't think he could go to your school. They wouldn't take him there, or make him walk around with a razor. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.